The Vancouver Aquarium Marine Science Centre is a non-profit. Seabirds and waterfowl are integral part of these environments, just like fish, whales, and phytoplankton. The year 20th anniversary of the first migratory bird treaty in North America. Over the last century, a total of 4 migratory bird treaties have collectively facilitated a long history of conditions and their habitats in the United States, Canada, Mexico, Japan, and Russia. To mark this year, the many trials and tribulations endured by migratory birds on their annual journey are being documented with the Pacific Flyway Ambassador Project, which is a partnership between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Environment and Climate Change Canada, National Audubon Society, Environment for the Americas, Bureau of Land Management, National Park Service, and the U.S. Forest Service. As part of this Pacific Flyway Ambassador Project, 2 interns are traveling from South California to Alaska along the major migration corridor, visiting wildlife refuges, collecting stories, and sharing their experience on social media. You can follow their story on social media at the handle @birdtrippers or with the hashtag birdtrippers. In addition, as part of the Centennial celebration, we are featuring experts who work on projects that protect birds in the migratory bird treaties. Our expert today is Dan Buffett, who is the head of conservation programs at the BC Coast Office of Ducks Unlimited Canada. In this role, Dan works with both government and non-government agencies, as well as landowners, to protect and restore freshwater and estuarine habitat along the BC coast. Dan has been with Ducks Unlimited since 1993 and completed his master's in resource and environmental management at Simon Fraser University in 2006. The title of his talk today is Coastal Invaders of the Botanic Kind, and we would like to thank Environment and Climate Change Canada for making this digital presentation possible. Dan?
Great, thank you. So today I want to tell you a story about our migratory bird habitat, the migrations that the birds take along the BC coast, but also want to tell you about another migratory species as well, one of the botanical kind called Spartina. And this little plant has now recently infested our migratory bird habitats, and several partners, including Ducks Unlimited, are together working to remove and restore our habitat for our fine feathered friends. So I wanted to look and provide a flight plan of what a migratory bird looks at throughout the year. So if you imagine here, outlined in gray or brown is the Pacific Flyway. And this is really your route of migratory birds as they nest and breed in the northern areas of North America and then winter in the southern areas. So along this way, these birds are moving through and they're going to have to pick up food along the way. Much as like any of us when we travel, whether in our cars or run, we always have to stop along the way and pick up food. The neat thing about this and the Migratory Treaty Act is over 100 years ago, Canada, the US, and subsequently Mexico recognized the connection between these northern and southern areas and created a partnership to work together to protect these birds and their habitat. So as I'd mentioned, really, one of the main roles of the BC coast is to provide food for these migratory birds as they move north and south, whether you're a migrating or you're a wintering bird. And often, many areas, birds will stop along these sites along the BC coast, picking up food as they move south. Some are going to remain in winter in the lower mainland, into and beyond. We know in BC we have over 1 million waterfowl that just winter in this area, but there's millions more of waterfowl, ducks, geese, and swans that will migrate through, millions of shorebirds as well. Now the BC coast, if people have had a chance to see, is really a long coastline. It's very rugged, steep-sided, but folded within it are these little pockets of estuaries. And estuaries are where rivers meet the sea. And in this confluence, it's where there are jewels of food produced for all sorts of species, whether it's birds or mammals or fish. And one of these large areas is in the red dot right here, where what we call the Fraser River Delta in the lower mainland. So outlined on the left in blue is what we call mudflats. These are habitats for migratory birds, and they're usually between high and low tide. And they provide a great source of food for birds. So whether you're an American widgeon here in the top left, picking up pieces of plant material or eelgrass, over to the right you might be a northern pintail, plucking seeds away from the intertidal zone or up in the adjacent agricultural land. In the middle might be a dunlin, again picking up all this protein-rich slurry of invertebrates found within our mudflats. Maybe you're a snowy owl in the bottom right-hand corner there, flying over the farm fields and picking away at rodents and voles, or, as many people recognize, fish and salmon. And these estuaries and mudflats are really critical to being nursery grounds for their food and vital for their existence. When you look at all the mudflats in BC, right here in the lower mainland, we have over 45% of the mudflats. So that's a huge food source for these birds. And as a result, this area is internationally important for wintering waterfowl, shorebirds, and raptors, and has the highest density of these wintering birds in all of Canada. So here's a picture of the mudflats. This is just out in Roberts Bank area, just out by the BC ferry terminals, just west of Delta. And as you can see, it's a nice, very gentle sloped area. At low tide, you can walk out for kilometers. And if you look on their footsteps, you can see all sorts of patches of food and plants. And this is the basis of the food for these birds. So if there's any plant or anything that's going to disrupt and remove this food, that's going to have huge impacts for our shorebirds and waterfowl. So I want to show you next slide what it looked like when Spartina infested an area just south in Washington State. This picture here that your grass, it's half of it's been mowed. This all used to be mudflat. So this all used to be important food for migratory birds. So this little shorebird here in the bottom middle, now when he's flying over, doesn't have a chance to land, let alone pick up any food in this area. On the bottom high, this grass can grow over time. Spartina has been more recent, is a more BC, and so we've been able to work with our partners in Washington State and Oregon and California to look at what they've learned over time and how to remove Spartina. In BC, Spartina is also known as a cordgrass. We've got 3 species. One is Spartina anglica. This is located right in our mudflats between the high and low tide, and it's located right now in the lower mainland. There's another species called Spartina Densiflora. This is located over in the Bain Sound area, over on Vancouver Island, and it's located a little higher up in the high tide zone. And finally, there's a third species, Spartina patens, and there's small little patches located in the Burrard end of the lower mainland and over on Courtney in Vancouver Island. So to give you a graphic depiction, just to show you where they are, we've got Spartina anglica we found in 2003. Over on the island, Densiflora in 2006. And we've now seen that Spartina patens has been relatively stable, but located in these 2 areas in Courtney and over in the Burrard Inlet area of Vancouver. So what have we been doing? So since 2003, a number of partners have come together to try and remove Spartina. We began manually digging this plant, and this takes a lot of effort from a lot of people and a lot of backbreaking work over time. For the larger areas, we then brought in some excavators to look at these large clone. So this one large clone you're looking at in front of the excavator, this would take 4 people 3 hours to dig out, put in bags, and haul it back to the shoreline. So we were using these methods originally. We've started evaluating some other methods, shading the plant with a geofabric. So this is covering the plant with essentially black plastic for about a 2-year period to kill the plant. And then finally, we had to start integrating herbicide, as you'll see how the story unfolds later. And that's been a more recent use and technique we've been using. So here's the story in the lower mainland. On this graph, on the left side is the number of clones or number of plants. On the bottom is over time, and each of these colors represents a different type of size of Spartina. Blue representing single plants, red for a tuft of Spartina that's probably about 1 foot in diameter, green a little larger between 0.3 and 1 of a meter, and the purple greater than 1 meter. And you can see in 2005, we started with some numbers and they started to drop over time. We were really excited about this. We were making progress just by manually digging this out and using the excavator. But something happened in 2007 and 2008. We lost some funding from some of our sponsors, and as a result, we couldn't hire the excavator, we couldn't hire as many crews. Well, guess what happens? You look in the final next year, like any invasive plant, it starts to grow, and with better conditions, it starts to spread. And finally, in 2009, 2010, we recognized that we were starting to lose containment, and this is when we needed to think about, do we need to incorporate herbicide? We didn't take that decision lightly because nobody wants to integrate herbicide, add something else to the environment. So we spent a number of years talking with Washington State and Oregon and California, learning the best management practices, what's going to be needed to properly use this herbicide. And we're actually glad we did, because a few years later, like any invasive plant, got to a certain threshold, and all of a sudden, the blue line representing these single plants, it was spreading thousands of seeds each year. And all of a sudden, we were up to 5,000 plants. Then the following year, those next size clones got bigger, and more of them as well, too. In 2013, we're starting to see a reduction, because that's the first year that we actually started to integrate herbicide as part of the program. So this is what it looked like. If anybody used to walk around Boundary Bay, see all these little flags, every little pink flag here that you see represents a Spartina. There was tens of thousands of these clones out there that we had crews manually removing the seedlings and small plants, and these larger areas, these larger tufts of Spartina, we were using herbicide. This gives you a spatial depiction of it. If you know the area, just south of Delta, west of Surrey, by the ferry causeways, you can see the different colors represents different size class, but I just want you to appreciate the sheer numbers. This probably represents about 20,000 different individual plants that we've mapped and are working on through this partnership over time. So what it looked like, here's a few pictures here of crews out in the mud flats with airboats, moving crews around. We're mapping each clone, treating each clone with a certain amount of herbicide, and then over time working together to work our way across the mud flats. And I have to say a special thank you to our partners south of the border, the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife, Washington State Department of Agriculture, and the San Francisco Estuary Spartina Project. These groups brought resources up here, including airboats and their expertise to help us away all along. So again, demonstrating our really important partnerships and the value of that over time. As well, we have a number of partners here that have been part of the Spartina program, whether it's been local government or federal government. We have Tawasin First Nation, we have the Friends of Semiahmoo Bay, community groups, invasive species programs, all collectively have been working together on the Spartina program since 2003. It's not all bad. We've got some good news. Detection program working on to remove Spartina, and we haven't been finding Spartina. So over time, we're slowly spreading out our mapping and detection program, and the good news is all these new areas we've been checking, we haven't found Spartina. Another part of good news is over on the island. These are the other two species I talked about earlier, a little higher up in the intertidal zone, Densiflora and patens. So Spartina Densiflora is the orange dots along Denman Island and the east coast of the island, and the patens are the pink ones closer to Courtney on the north side. All those orange areas that we've mapped over the last 3 years, as of a month ago, there's no Spartina at all. These crews from the communities of Denman Island and the Vancouver Island Conservation Land Management Program have been working tirelessly to dig up acres of Spartina, and now all we have are small individual seedlings that are growing. So there's good success story and to be optimistic on this. So finally, as I wind down the talk, I wanted to again thank the working group members, again, a mix of government and non-government groups that have been tirelessly every year working together to map and implement our program. The financial support from the province, the Government of Canada through the National Conservation Plan, Port Metro Vancouver, and the TD Friends of the Environment. Because collectively, we're looking to keep this for our fine-feathered friends in the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. That was really insightful. I know that I personally learned quite a bit about the migratory birds that we have off of our coast, and hopefully this was very beneficial for all of you watching at home as well. Thank you.